Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The Committee on General Government Operations and Housing now convenes this special economic services meeting. Meeting notes were given to the media on June 10th, and it was rescheduled, and notice was out on June 24th. And then our second notice was given on June 27th. And for the record, today is July 2nd. The time now is 9:03. I will now call the Special Economic Service meeting to order. I'd ask my staff to please conduct the roll call.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chairman Senator Joe S. Agustin.
Present.
Standing in from the Office of Finance and Budget for Mr. Stephen Guerrero is Luetin Terlahi.
Present.
Office of the Public Auditor. Thank you. Director of the Bureau of Budget Management and Research, Mr. Lester Carlson, Jr. Director of Revenue and Taxation, Ms. Daphne Shimizu.
Present.
Director of the Department of Administration.
Edward Byrne, present.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. Administrator for the Economic Development and Commerce Authority, standing in for Ms. Melanie Mendiola is Mr. Ricky Hernandez.
Present.
Standing in for the Chief Economics of the Department of Labor is Mr. Greg S. Massey.
Present.
Chief Economics of the Bureau of Statistics and Plans, Mr. Tyrone Titano.
The legislatively mandated position of Chief Economist for the Bureau of Stats and Plans currently is vacant, so there will be no representation today from that agency.
Administrator of Research and Evaluation of the Guam Visitors Bureau, Mr. Nico Fujikawa.
Present.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You have a quorum.
Thank you. I'd like to acknowledge the presence of my colleagues, Senator Regine Bisco-Lee and Senator Therese Terlahi. The rules of engagement for the SES meeting. When speaking, please ensure the microphone is on and introduce yourself for the record. SES members may make inquiry during the discussion on agenda items. I'd ask that any outside parties or any other than the SES members may make follow-up inquiries after all agenda items have been exhausted. We will now address our agenda. Our agenda is stated. First item would be the FY 2019 General Fund Revenue Tracking.
Mr. Chairman, may I make an amendment, sir, to the agenda? We have a presentation, and we'd like to move the economic outlook from where it is currently situated at item 6 and move it up to item 2.
If there are no objections with the members, so be it.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, but Mr. Carlson, the slide is ready. They're just printing out so that everybody will have a copy. Okay, so you can go ahead with one, and then we'll move to the economic outlook after that.
So everybody present has a copy, hard copy, or are you gonna? They're coming?
They should have a copy, right? You have a copy of the revenue? Yes. Yes. Yeah, everyone should have a copy. We can go over.
No, of this.
Oh, no, that one, no, not yet. That one they're making copy of.
What is the pleasure of the chair? Would you like to take a brief recess to get the copies? It might be more beneficial for...
Yes. Let's take a hopefully no more than a 5-minute recess, and we'll wait pending the copy because they're making it right now.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. All right, members, we're going to go ahead and start. Bert, can you make sure that they're ready to present the PowerPoint? I'd like to also recognize two other colleagues that have joined us, Senator Kelly Mars Taitano and Senator Telo Taidugui has also joined us. Okay, there it is. Lester.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much, everybody. We have taken the agenda from Senator San Augustine, Chairman San Augustine, and put together a presentation that is sequentially similar with the exception of having moved the economic outlook from number 6 to number 2. So hopefully we can go through this in a manner that kind of has some sense and sensibility attached to it. So beginning with the first item on the agenda, which is the April and May Consolidated Revenue and Expenditure Report. I will be going over a summary of the April and May revenues. Mr. Byrne will then take over and discuss the expenditures associated with the same months. So I will begin by going to what is slide 2. This is the April Consolidated Revenue and Expenditure Report. What we did for the purposes of discussion and illustration was take the different tax categories, and you have on column 2 the FY19 adopted level, the FY19 tracking level, the variance column on the far right. You will note that we highlighted the tax categories that are exceeding projected levels at this point in time. I probably will say that about 12 times today. With a total of $37,318,000 positive variance in the April report. There are footnotes that are attached to the CRER. I'm moving now to slide 3. I'd like to pay specific attention to what it is that this slide contains. We do have the additional child tax credit collections, which we've made a conscious decision to accommodate the prior OFB director and chairman's request, which was not to count that in the revenue tracking. So what we did was we met them halfway, and we go ahead and we give you the full collection. Then the footnote will tell you how much we ended up netting out. There are also non-recurring revenue collections. Non-recurring revenue collections are, say somebody, a corporation files something out of the normal time frame, and that's maybe to catch up or something. So we can't really add that to our tracking, and so we make notations on those occurrences. So the last bullet, for lack of a bullet, is the adjusted tracking less anomalies. So you see that we have $37,318,863,000 less the total ACTC and non-recurring of $16,322,177. The adjusted tracking, which is what I would like people to focus on, is bolded. So the adjusted tracking is $20,996,686 above the 19 adopted level for the month of April. Moving on to the next slide for the similar exercise for the month of May. Again, we have the tax categories, the 19 adopted level, the 19 tracking, and then the variance. Again, the positive variances are highlighted, and the variance in the month of May is $41,444,661. I would take you then to slide 5 so we can go through the same exercise with backing out the anomalies. So you basically have the $41,444,661 less the ACTC and non-recurring. And I would point out that in the prior month, the non-recurring was $16 million. As you can tell, we got some additional non-recurring Anomalies. Now that number is $17,821,336, with an adjusted tracking of $23,623,325 above the FY19 adopted level. That's the overview on where we are with revenues collected for those 2 months on the agenda. Slide 6, I'd like to defer to Mr. Edward Byrne to do the other side of the Consolidated Revenue and Expenditure Report, which is to discuss the expenditures.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have the luxury of having both months on one slide, which makes it a little bit easier to make a comparison. As far as the April CRAR is concerned, and if I may, I'll just refer to the round millions. We collected $515 million in general fund revenues. We actually expended $362 million, and this is prepared on a budget basis, so we are also deducting the encumbrances that are there. Encumbrances don't normally affect the general fund balance, but on a budget basis they do, which is why we've made clear that this is a budget basis report. And if you also deduct the tax refunds that we paid at the end of April, we had an available general fund balance of $130 million. That means that we had $130 million to get us through the end of the year. Of course, that doesn't take account of whatever new revenues that we might collect. And as you can see, if I can draw your attention to the May report, we collected about another $60 million, but we also spent another $50 million, and encumbrances came down slightly, but we've still got $13 million worth of encumbrances out there. But as you can see, we paid out a whole lot more in tax refunds. We actually got up to $54 million. There'll be more details on the tax refunds later in the presentation, which gives us a total available general fund balance of $92 million.
A point of information too, again, the total tax refunds paid to date is $54 million. That's cumulative for the fiscal year.
Yes.
Okay. Moving on to the agenda, April Special Fund Tracking Report. Very similar format where you have the fund, the FY19 adopted level, the tracking, and the variance. So you can see that for purposes of illustration, we still have an issue with the TEFF and the adopted level, and of course some of the hiccups that we had with being able to make the proper adjustments in order to collect the additional tax revenue that was appropriated in this fiscal year. So that's the biggest drag currently in special fund collections. As of April, it was $3.8 million. And then similarly, on the next page, for May, the Special Fund Tracking Report, you can see that that number improved a little bit, just a little bit. It went from $3,881,000 variance. So it went down to $3,833,000. So I also would like to point out that I believe the delinquent tax report was not captured in this reporting period, and that normally stirs up a little bit more collection because people will be notified if they haven't already that they need to make a payment, so that you might see a little bit more of a narrowing of that gap. We certainly hope so. We have a lot of things that are funded operationally. We have DPW bus operations. We have DOE that are recipients of funding from this fund source. So we're very hopeful that this gap will continue to narrow, although I believe it will not be achieved. It just, I think we're getting there, but we won't get there. Mr. Chairman, really is kind of a number one. The April and May CRER and April and May special fund tracking reports presented to the committee for their information. Yeah, I'd like to proceed, sir, as I requested to go through a few slides to basically lay out the economic outlook from what it is that we believe people need to be able to understand, we think will occur in the upcoming fiscal year to support when we start actually talking about the next item on the agenda, which will be the fiscal 2020 executive budget requests for the major tax categories. So I'm on slide 9 now. Thank you. We do have Government of Guam funds, very recently for the Port Authority of Guam, and we also have Guam Waterworks Authority, who from a previous bond issue has recently awarded a $120 million contract to Black Construction. Similarly, I believe the Port Authority is well on its way to being able to draw down the bond money that they received last year. The Guam Power Authority still has, from prior bond issues, about $108 million, which I have all indications that they are looking at being able to expend those monies sooner rather than later, and I believe we're on track for a lot of that money to be expended in this fiscal year. There are a number of projects that we identified in the Governor's executive budget request in the economic outlook section. Everybody, I'm sure, is well aware of the significant progress in the Subaki Hotel. So, that hotel seems to be close to being topped off, if it's not already topped off. We have the application for land use for the Guam International, this is the airport construction with the third floor. And as everybody is well aware, that is ongoing as well. And it should certainly take us into 2020. There are tax credits that have been issued for two GURA projects, Summertown Estates Phase 3, 66 low-income units in the Otlada Estate area, and Villa Del Mar, 50 low-income units in the Cañada Totolup area in Maungmaung. Those are cumulatively at $50 million, and we're talking about, home construction for a specific demographic of our community. Summer Towers up there in the Jonestown area, we are being told that one tower is fully occupied and the remaining towers are being addressed. And we expect that real estate, when it becomes available for occupancy, is certainly going to have a positive effect on fiscal 2020. Last couple times I've been down in Tumon, I have seen that mall. It appears that it is, getting very, very close to the interior finishing and hopefully an opening very soon. The Fishermen's Co-op, while this has been delayed, there is $3 million that has been earmarked from hot bond money for this, so I thought it was appropriate that it should continue to be part and parcel to what it is we can expect. And I know that there's been a lot of work that's been done. There is a bit of a stall. I'm hoping that the cooperative will be able to begin working again, because certainly the cash is there, and there's been a significant amount of soft costs and design work done. So I believe that with a little bit of assistance, that project actually might have some positive economic benefits in fiscal 2020. And we're all aware of the National Tennis Center project that was recently started, and there's actually a lot of progress in that respect. Those tennis people, they want to get moving. On the next slide, slide 11, just to recall, to mind, We do have, you know, some recently completed projects, and they have provided, you know, certainly employment opportunities as well as BPT taxes for the government. So you have the Olive Garden, the the phenomenal reception to Jollibee, which, you know, was a kind of still something that I think people are amazed about. McDonald's had a new location. The BMW 8K showroom is open. And our good friends at Red Lobster had their official opening, I believe it was yesterday. So we have, you know, additional employment created in the private sector. I believe that basically bodes well for private sector looking at government's and Guam's economic outlook and thinking that it's an appropriate investment to make. We all are aware, moving down the slide, that Don Quixote development is across from the Tumuni McDonald's. There has been an application for land use change, if I'm not mistaken, for the Guam International Airport Authority Hotel. I was driving on Route 8 for like back and forth, and finally said, what the heck's going on over there between the Mobile and the Shell station? And apparently our good friends, American Grocery, are doing a second location in Mighty. So that location is well underway. And then the recent news from Jollibee that due to their phenomenal response, they're looking at 4 additional locations. And then you have the announcement from GTA that they're doing this neutral cable landing station and data center. Moving to slide 12, I'm not real sure if the public at large is aware of the huge economic impact that the 2020 census will have on the island of Guam. There is $13.8 million that has been allocated to do the census. The estimated breakdown of that funding is on the second note. In 19, they expect to expend about $1.1 million, but the bulk of it is expected to be done in fiscal 20 when the actual enumeration and the people that are going knocking door to door and that massive employment influx occurs. The estimated employment necessary to be able to effectively conduct the 2020 census is about 1,154 new positions that will be needed just to be able to adequately cover the census in a manner that adequately captures the data that the census provides. I would be remiss in, again, not pointing out the fact that there are some immediate positive effects that will occur in 2020 due to this initiative itself. Certainly there will be an increase in withholding taxes and BPT. When people have money, they tend to spend it. Moving on to the next slide, slide 13. Here's just an overview of military construction and update. The NDAA authorization is on the right-hand side of the page on the top. And it basically, you know, you've got Navy appropriations of $367 million, you know, approved for work on Guam in the FY19 NDAA. And you've got the munitions storage igloos of $9.8 million with a total of $377 million of approved funding for more DoD projects on Guam. The next page basically I thought was very useful in being able to give everybody an idea of throughout the island where the specific projects are located. They're certainly well dispersed with a lot of them in the north and central area so that you know, everybody can have an idea of just exactly, you know, it's not just all behind the fences in the north. There are significant, activity, particularly associated with the wastewater improvements and things of that nature that are necessary, along with port improvements, and that's something I thought would be useful just so people can have a better idea. I do have a note before I start winding down this. Mr. Hiles is currently on leave. He sent me an email yesterday. Basically, he says that everything that we are looking at, seems to be on track, and that we are well poised to be able to realize the anticipated economic activity. And with that, sir, I'd like to be able to recognize Mr. Greg Massey and have him give the group an update on the H-2 labor situation.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Currently we have 931 H-2s on the ground. All of them are pretty much for what we call military associated projects. But again, that doesn't just necessarily mean it's inside the fence. It could be outside the fence. For an example, the Sabaki Hotel has a significant number of workers on that project. We're seeing a little bit more stability in the H-2 system now with the NDA exemption that came through the National Defense Authorization Act in 2018 and 19. Pretty much we haven't had any denials on any of those requests. So, it's a turnaround from the 100% denials that we started seeing in 2015. One indicator of, that system working is one contractor had recently mentioned to me that within the next year, they're going to be scaling up to about 700 H-2s for the projects they have. That particular employer has, I think it's several $100 million worth of projects that are let. I'd have to look, but I mean, that's a big scale up from the 150 that they have right now to 700 within a year. So that it just shows that those projects are out there being let right now, and that there's some stability in that system coming in. I took a quick look at the labor certifications that we had approved for this fiscal year, and we're tracking, and we look at project amounts in relation to the H-2s. Right now, we're looking at about $388 million in ongoing work that folks are applying for H-2s for. Overall, looking at some of the military stuff, and this spans fiscal years, but just in military relocation projects, we're looking at $657.6 million in just marine relocation projects that are out there. So it's a good indicator of where we're going in the next year and 2 years. And then I noticed the numbers that were that Lester had shown for NDAA. The charts was going up, but might want to mention the 2020 NDAA. They're proposing over $400 million in additional projects, so that's going to kind of show for next fiscal year. Currently, we have 1,299 approved petitions that USCIS has approved for. So, although the number's at 931 right now, employers could easily scale up to over 1,300 workers immediately with just existing approvals. And we kind of expect that in the next coming year, we're going to exceed 1,400. It's been a little bit slow because of that Philippine list situation that happened. There are little speed bumps that, because this is all employer driven. So it's not really us that brings in the H-2s, it's the employers. So if there's not confidence in the system, then they tend to hold their cards a little bit. But just seeing that one company that typically hasn't used H-2s for decades now is going to have 700 H-2s goes to show what the volume is out there. Given also that we do have a large construction workforce, there's about 5,000 locals in the construction workforce. But we do have gap occupations where we have lacks in carpenters, masons, iron workers, and that's pretty much what I'd say the lion's share of our H-2s are being brought in for. That's pretty much all I have. If you have any questions, I can answer.
All right. Lester, you had We have, I think DRT is next, right? Or you still got to present us the governor's executive budget request? Thank you.
Just a little bit more of your time, sir. So, slide 15, this is the FY 2020 Governor's Executive Budget Request. What we've done for purposes of illustration again is take the major tax categories, the current fiscal year adopted level, and then you'll see down the bottom the total of $775 million. You've got the FY19 tracking of $817 million. Going across, you have the 2020 request of $808 million. And then you see the variance of essentially $9 million that the tracking has over the 2020 request. Similarly to the other information that we provided, each one of the tax categories is, in this case, we reversed it. The areas in which there is a variance are highlighted, the negative variance, as opposed to what we showed you previously with the positive variance. You can take a look at where the tracking is versus the variance, but at the end of the day, when you total everything up, the executive budget request of $808,196,568 million is tracking under the $8,877,071 that the FY19 levels are tracking at. Again, I would be remiss if I didn't continue to drive home the point that these are tracking numbers. We don't know how we're going to end up until we end up. Like Yogi Berra said, it ain't over till it's over. So, we are very optimistic that this trend will continue. However, be mindful that a storm, Asian bird flu, continued political unrest. There are just a number of factors that traditionally have put kind of a damper on revenue collections. And while we are optimistic, we are very cautious too with essentially 4 months of the fiscal year that have not been reported, that we're 2/3 of the way there, but we're not there yet. And again, I'd like to remind the committee that the special fund report, does indicate that there are some areas that are in need of assistance. I will call to mind the fact that the Customs and Quarantine request for 2020 is augmented by $1.2 million from the general fund, simply because their funding needs and their fee structure does not line up currently. So you'll see that they're tracking about $1.1 million below in the Customs and Quarantine. There needs to be some adjustments made. Similarly, going back to the Territorial Education Facilities Fund, tracking about $3.8 million below. I'm in consultation with the DOA director and the governor's chief fiscal advisor. The circular we sent out on January 2nd, imposing reserves on appropriations for TEFF funded agencies. We're going to be issuing a revised one. We're going to be releasing some of the reserves because we were at $9 million, now we're at 3.7. So we felt that we're comfortable enough knowing that we're tracking to be able to receive an amount that we previously withheld. So we're going to do a partial release and provide some assistance to some of the agencies that were affected. So we anticipate doing that within a week or so. We're just making sure everybody's comfortable with what it is that we're proposing to be done. But we're almost ready to release that lightening of the restrictions that were imposed. I'd like to turn it over to revenue tax now.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Lester. With regards to this slide, the heading is Status of Income Tax Refund Payments. This information is based on the refund liability report that's filed with the legislature on a monthly basis, and that refund liability report is as of May 31, 2019. So this information is, I guess it coincides with the information that was provided for the May CRER, right, because it's on the same basis of time. If you look at this, the first section is on the individual income tax refunds that have been paid. So these are the actual amounts of refunds that have been paid. And if you look at tax year 2018, which we just began to pay in this year in April 2019, as of the $54 million that, I guess if you refer to slide 6, that was paid to date for this fiscal year, 28 million of that was for tax year 2018 individual income tax returns. With regards to what we tried to do was to show an average, and so if you look at that middle section where it says 3-year average, and disregard it, the final or the last section is really, it's not a trend, it's more of an average that validates the 134 million, but we wanted to show what the average refunds were for tax years 15 to 17. And when we look back and we averaged those, we came up with approximately 135 million over the last 3 years, 15 to 17. And so that's what that represents. And so in terms of individual income tax returns, again, that's how much of the 54 million paid through fiscal year, paid for fiscal year 2019 through May, the $28 million in individual. And if you look to the second section where it's corporate income tax refunds paid, there was approximately 10,000 in corporate income tax refunds that have been paid for tax year 2018. And that's the status of the income tax refund payments. If we move to the next slide, which is the tax amnesty program update. So what we tried to do was provide an update of where we are with regards to amnesty. And so there are two sections of this because there was amnesty on income tax, BPT, and other taxes, and there was also amnesty on allowed for real property taxes, or the TEF. Total tax due, if you look at the second column, so the total amount of taxes due relating to those applications for amnesty was approximately 33.6 million for general fund type taxes, and 1.5 million for real property taxes, or TAF. So we had total applications of about 35.1 million, and that's how much the taxes that were due for those applications were. We received approximately 28.9 million for the general fund taxes and about 1.3 million in TEF, or about 30 million altogether, and which leaves almost, about 4.8 or 4.9 million total that were denied for various reasons. It could be because the organization or individual wasn't able to comply with filing all their returns, or they couldn't come up with the remainder of the payment. So what will happen with these amounts is that they will be reclassed as AR again, and then we go back and we collect on those items. And that's where we are with regards to amnesty. And if we go to the next slide, which is the real property tax estimate. Now, what we did was we went back and we looked at how much we had invoiced for those properties valued at $1 million or more. And of that amount, that amount was approximately $8 million. We collected approximately $5 million, and so there's a balance due of about 2.9 or about $3 million left to collect on those. As Lester pointed out, though, the delinquent real property tax listing did go out just in June 8. It was published in the Post, and so we are expecting that we will see some movement in the real property tax payments in the month of June. Thank you.
All right, now we'll proceed to GVB.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Much like the numbers that were just presented, I'm happy to say that the visitor industry has made a full recovery from the effects of the North Korea threats, which ended our fiscal year 2018 at a negative 2%. If you can move on to the slides again. Thank you. The next slide, thank you. Our projections, our original projections for FY 2019 were stated at 1.6 million there on that third column, but we're actually tracking slightly better, and I always like to be wrong when the numbers are better than mine, so we are tracking a little bit better, but still very much on track to hit a record arrivals of 1.6 million for this year. A lot of that has to do with the extended work we've done to recover the Japanese market. You can look at the visitor arrivals for FY 2019 tracking. You'll see that from my original projections, Japan was actually at 600,000, but are tracking towards 650,000, whereas Korea is slightly dropping, and part of the reason for this, I'll explain a little bit further, but the Korean market, we've seen exceptional growth over this past decade, and they have now begun to stabilize. The market itself, there's too many seats within the market. A lot of LCCs were introduced very quickly year over year. And while Guam has capitalized on that, this is now the turning point in the cycle of things. So if we can move on to the next slide. For calendar year to date, from January to June 26, we're tracking at 5.6% better than FY 2018. As I mentioned, we are back on track as if 2018 never happened. 2017 into 2019 would have been the same steady growth that we've seen year over year. I do have to point out that we are struggling with our China and Taiwan markets. The geopolitical climate with the US and China hasn't helped our situation, and we just got recent news. I think everybody saw United will be stopping their Hong Kong direct service to Guam. However, they will be reallocating that asset to service Nagoya. So a new opportunity with more flights and more seats coming out of Japan. Finally, next slide, please. Fiscal year to date, very much similar to calendar year to date. We're at close to 6% growth over last year, with the exceptional growth coming out of Japan. Again, you'll see the numbers with Japan and Korea. I'm flipping at this point with a 23.8% growth over last year, whereas Korea's dropping at negative 3.6. I do want to keep in mind that we are very limited with our capacity. Our hotel rooms have not grown significantly over the past decade at the rate in which our demand is growing. With that being said, our occupancy rates are at like 87% for this year, with our average daily rates over $200 for hotel rooms. So because of our limited capacity, the cost of coming to Guam is increasing. And when one market grows, it has to make room in another market. So we're seeing Japan and Korea fighting again for that top spot. Finally, I'm sorry, next slide, sorry. I think we're at, yes. So all our projections and our arrivals all come down to the seat capacity in which bring our visitors here. And I wanted to end with this slide just so we know and kind of get the picture that you'll see Korea from 2015 to 2019 grew basically an annual average of 15.4% year over year in seat capacity. That now has started to drop, as you'll see in the arrivals as well. For 2020, looking forward, one of our biggest initiatives and goals is to bring in more charter flights and to really try and capture new airlines that haven't serviced Guam so that we increase competition, which make our island destination a little more affordable for certain markets and a lot more attractive. But overall, we are doing a lot better, and we have fully recovered from 2018, and we are on track to hit our best year yet this year. I'd like to end on a happy note, so thank you.
Mr. Chairman, just a couple of comments. Going back to slide 8, where you'll see the May tracking for the Tourist Attraction Fund, the adopted level of $44,746,562. The variance right now is less than $500,000. With current trends continuing, it is more than likely that level will actually be achieved. And again, kudos to the visitor industries as a whole for ensuring that, I believe, an aggressive, TAF adopted level for 19 will be achieved. Similarly, I'd like to make one more statement, sir, on page 6. I just want to, I worked at the legislature. I just want to make sure that people understand the meaning here. So the total, under the April 2019 CRER, you have, says total available general fund balance. Available doesn't mean available for appropriation. Available means what's remaining from what was adopted and allocated and how we're tracking against the budget. Similarly, in the May, total available general fund balance, those numbers do not connote, or should encourage anybody thinking, oh, we're basically got $90 million, to be able to, it's available. It's what's remaining in the current year allocation. And as Mr. Byrne had said, you can tell how the revenues are tracking, less the expenditures, which increase, and similarly you have the encumbrances as well. So I just want to make sure that we're clear on that note. And sir, with that, I believe that concludes our presentation.
Thank you, Lester. I'd like you to actually bring us back to, because of that statement, and maybe that statement actually would follow page 3 and page 5. And the reason why I ask that is because you're tracking over, on page 3, you're tracking over 20 million above level. And then in May, you're tracking 23 million above the level. But I think everybody needs to understand is that across the board, we still have a few more months. And if we run into anything, any unexpected occurrence, that 23 million is gone.
Thank you very much, sir. That is the most paramount reason for ensuring that this, the 2 slides, as you are referring to, that we had some very focused discussion. This is just general fund. And again, take a look at the special funds. Take a look at the areas that, if trends continue, there will be shortfalls. There needs to be a cognizant understanding of where we are and the fact that we've got 4 more months left in the fiscal year. I think the optimism should be there that we'll hit revenues as adopted. I think that general fund revenues. However, the bigger picture requires a step back and some very, deep breathing as to what may or may not occur. Mr. Byrne, I think traditionally we see a little bit of a drop-off in the summer months. Might you want to elaborate on that?
Yes, that is absolutely correct. From July through October, we tend to see a drop-off in collections of revenues. So we've really gone through the fat months, and we're going into the lean months very shortly.
But, excuse me, Mr. Chair, aren't the lean months incorporated in your tracking and your revenue estimates in the first place? You've estimated less in those months?
Yes, but that doesn't really account for fund balances or cash balances, because that tracking is through the remainder of the year. But then, and at the end of any month, there might be an exaggerated effect from uneven collections.
Okay. Mr. Bradley, I'm wondering if you can give us some insight on the economic, because you've done this for how many years? 30, 40 years? Okay, thank you.
I have one primary concern with our economy today, and I understand and appreciate that we're bringing in H-2 workers, H-2B workers, to work on military-related projects. We aren't bringing in H-2B workers to work on civilian projects. many of the construction workers who reside in Guam, who would normally be working on civilian projects, are now working on the bases, which is why the number of H-2Bs coming in for the military contractors is not as high as one would have expected. This is a serious problem, and I don't see it being corrected. This is a problem we had back in the mid-1980s when the Immigration and Naturalization Service, the predecessor of Citizenship and Immigration Service, made the same claim that construction work is permanent in nature and therefore you may not use temporary alien workers. Well, partly because of the characteristics of an H-2B visa, which is that the worker comes in to work on one project for a maximum of 3 years. When the project ends, they repatriate. When the 3 years is up, they repatriate. That, by definition, in my mind, is a temporary job. And further, the second part of that is when the project is completed, the job is done. That's not a permanent job, and it's not anywhere in the rest of the United States either. When the project is done, the job is done. And we were able to convince Immigration and Naturalization Service back in the mid-1980s, I believe it was 1985, that these are not permanent jobs. And they then allowed Guam to bring in temporary, at the time just H-2s, there was no B suffix. But that spawned the largest construction boom in Guam since the military buildup back in the 1950s and early 1960s. We built lots of new hotel rooms. We brought in many, many additional tourists and generated an enormous number of jobs in this economy. We now have fewer jobs filled in Guam than we had in 1992. And I think that that is a serious problem in this economy because our population has continued to grow. One of the ramifications of not engaging in civilian construction projects is that we are not building new industrial or commercial space, so those jobs, there aren't being jobs created there. The construction work may be temporary in nature, but what the buildings that they build for industry and for commerce are permanent. And the jobs created in those buildings are the permanent jobs. And I think that it's crucial that that point be at kind of the top of the list in terms of the economic issues that we face today. What I've been seeing is gradual growth in the payroll employment over the last 15 years or so, but it's very gradual. It is not keeping pace with the growth of our population, with the growth of our working age population. We've seen unemployment rate as low as, I believe it was 3.8% at the end of 2018. It rose to 4.3% in the first quarter of this year, but nonetheless, we're straining our existing labor force in terms of the availability of jobs, and yet we have a huge number of unemployed people who are discouraged workers. They've quit looking for a job. And I think that we need to do something a little bit more than what the Contractors Association has done. And also I think that we need to consider the possibility that Citizenship and Immigration Service does not consider every construction project in Guam to be military related.
Thank God for the census that's coming up to hire 1,000 folks. I mean,
Temporarily.
temporarily. Right. Reggie from Gita, you have anything you wanted to contribute to the SES? Because you know you do play a role to some degree.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Typically Gita's role in this is just to kind of discuss the tax credits that are outstanding. I know it's not on the agenda, but I don't have copies prepared, but I could just let everyone know, at least for FY 2020, as it impacts the budget. There's only 2 active tax credit programs. And the first one is the Harmon Industrial Park program. It's tax credits against BPT and use taxes, and I believe that has been incorporated into the FY 2020 budget. The other active tax credit program was the Tidzin Gymnasium construction. This is the Guam Basketball Confederation tax credit program. I believe there is approximately 369,000 available through FY 2020. Both of these tax credit programs have caps on it, and each year they have specific caps, and so the total in FY 2020 that is going to be available for both of these tax credit programs based on the laws that enabled them. For FY 2020, the additional available is about 1.25 million. So that's the tax credits that are expected to be utilized for FY 2020 by these companies, these private sector companies. The other item that I have available is just an update of the debt limit as it relates to the outstanding debt. This is as of May 30, 2019. So this is data related to the most updated data we have as it relates to payments of bonds or bonds that affect the debt ceiling. So the current debt ceiling is $1,316,264,859, and the total debt outstanding that's applicable to that debt ceiling is $1,051,606,442, which provides an available amount under the debt ceiling of $264.6 million. And then there are two authorized borrowings that would be applicable to the debt ceiling that hasn't been released yet or issued. One is the Department of Land Management building, which was back in 2009. That's 15.7 million. And then the GMH Labor and Delivery Ward, which is about 9.2 million. So if those were to be issued, then there would be available under the debt ceiling amount of 239.7 million. So that's all I have.
Thank you. Nothing from OPA. Okay. The director of OFB, you have questions you want to bring to the administration?
Yes, Lester, going back to page 15, your slide. We're currently working our numbers now, but the one area that we have significant variance is the individual. In comparison, your 2020 request was 85 million compared to about 82 million in your tracking. However, as you stated earlier, your tracking included ACTC and also anomalies. So if you were to grow that, that's about, I think it was about 20 million. Dropped down to about 60-some million. So maybe we're missing something, and maybe you could elaborate of your individual individual tax projection for 2020.
Okay, so we all essentially work off the same model, and there are just certain other elements that I think that we collectively either include or choose not to include. But it would be incumbent, I think, on us to be able to actually work with the Office of Finance and Budget to be able to go through an exercise, and then we can come back to the committee on what the variances is in what it is that you guys are tracking versus what we're tracking. Because it was very appropriate that the chairman recognized Mr. Hernandez, because we are benefiting from Mr. Hernandez's prior experience in being able to assist the administration in putting forward the governor's proposed general fund revenue estimates. And I have no problem with sitting down and then later on maybe a joint report back to the chairman and the committee on where we are with respect to differences. I think I think from a give and take standpoint, that at the end, because I actually have the tracking as well, the bottom line is we're very close to each other. It's just we have some differences in certain categories. But I think, and I hope you can publicly concur that right now, the bottom line projection is very close. So that's what I would love everybody to take away. We may have individual, categories that we're like, oh, how'd you get that? But at the end of the day, our bottom lines are very, very close.
Yeah, so that's why I was just wondering whether maybe we're missing something and we probably just got to meet.
Yeah, but yes, I welcome, we welcome the interaction so that when the budget discussion begins in earnest, it is always incumbent on a adoption of revenue levels that we're all very, very comfortable with to be able to then pave the way for the allocation. So we welcome that.
And then we're taking a look at the provision for tax refunds. I think that's why we asked for the information of how the trend is. So with the 125 provision, do you feel that that's sufficient? Should we, page 16, right? That was your.
Right, so if you look at slide 16, what we did was, again, we basically went back and said, okay, what is the average that we've been seeing over the last 3 years? So the average comes up to about 134.7 or 134.8 million. So that's the average for the last 3 years. With regards to a trend, we actually didn't do a trending. We just did an average.
So are you saying 125 is sufficient or too much or too little?
Well, I mean, if you look back, no, again, this slide doesn't take into consideration when the payments are made, right? So we know that the 2018 tax year payments were made, the 28 million of the 2018 tax year payments were made in FY 2019. And so the remainder of the difference between 28 million and 54 million is going to be from prior years. So with regards to, again, the way that this reads is, this is basically the average that's paid out for each tax year. This is not the average that's been paid out within the fiscal year. And so to date, we've, through May 31, as was indicated in slide 6, 54 million has been paid out in total refunds for all tax years. And both DOA's and Revenue Taxes numbers tie. I mean, they reflect that about 54 million has been paid out. But the average that we pay out for each tax year is over 125, right? If we look at this number.
And if I could also point out that the 138 million includes the ACTC cash, which is not included in the 125 million.
And again, the banner years were like 18 million in ACTC. On a slow year, it's around 10. So remember, the ACTC's 90% goes back into tax refunds and 10% for DRT's operations. So again, the general fund is augmented by the ACT reimbursements, which then goes into paying out more tax refunds. So in a lean year, we're still getting that $9 million, which is the delta between 125 and 134.
And also with regards to ACTC, what we're seeing is because of the tax cuts jobs, the ACTC actually did increase a little bit. So we're probably going to see a little bit more in the ACTC as well.
I'd like to also recognize that I've also joined by my colleagues, Senator Sabina Paris and Senator Jose Piro Terlay. I'd ask my colleagues if they have any questions. Senator, we'll start with you, Senator Lee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you everyone for joining us this morning. One of my questions is about vendor payables. Can somebody speak to our vendor payables to date?
Senator, you're asking how much we owe vendors at the moment. The last time I looked, which was last week, it was about 18 million.
18 million. And based on the current revenue collections that you've presented today, how much outstanding vendor payables were able to be paid down?
Well, this time last year, vendor payables of the order of 41 million.
Okay.
So we've made a considerable progress in paying down payables.
And in in the 18 million that you're describing, how many of those are beyond 90 days?
We actually are paying down we pay every other week payables. We're paying down the beyond 90 days, and the last payment we made, which was 2 weeks ago, because last week was a payroll week, it was about 230,000.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, I have a few more questions, but I'll allow the other colleagues to go first.
All right. Senator Lai, do you have any questions, ma'am?
There have been discussions in the media recently about using lapses to pay for certain things, such as MIP, I think, that there are lapses in public health's budget, for example, that would cover MIP. And then, I can't recall, but if you could clarify the source of payment that was being proposed for the war claims, and if those are also lapses in budgets. But when I asked BBMR for a report on the lapses, they're saying we can't get that until the end of the fiscal year. We won't know in the lapses. So I'm wondering, how are we able to spend those right now without an additional appropriation? Are you able to spend those on whatever you decide, I guess, wherever you see the shortfalls? For example, the special fund shortfalls. Are you able to use lapses in general fund agencies to pay for those?
Thank you, Senator. Currently, the governor does not have special fund transfer authority. She only has general fund transfer authority. The recent disaster relief bill provided that Medicare match will not be necessary for the rest of the fiscal year. The Medicaid match is, to a good degree, general fund money. So the idea is that, again, it's not over till it's over. Unfortunately, this war claims thing is going to take some time. I think everybody understands that we, despite our best desire as a group to pay survivors immediately, we are hampered by the fact we don't have a list. And there's HEPA requirements that are primarily driving that because of the injuries. So there's going to have to be a process in which notifications to adjudicated claimants are made and permission is provided by them to the government, so that the government, it's going to take a little while. We're trying to expedite this. We're hoping that Congress will assist in the matter and pass H.R. 1365 and take all these, impediments away. But we're trying to be able to do something meaningful, and the opportunity, primarily as it exists for Medicaid match for the rest of the fiscal year, is available. Is it lapsing? No. Is it earmarked for the potential compensation to survivors as it stands right now without any adverse impacts to revenue collection? Yes.
Are you able to spend it that way?
No, we're going to need your authorization. So one of the things we are talking about, there are a couple of ways to do this. The easiest way for me is if we amend in this year's budget law the governor's transfer authority, because she has transfer authority for governmental operations. This is not in government operation; it's outside.
So Mr. Carlson, just back to the numbers.
Excuse me, ma'am. You asked me for an explanation, if you don't mind.
I asked you for the source of the payment.
So I kind of wasn't done yet.
Okay.
So you asked me
Please,
if you need
yes,
legislation.
go ahead. Please.
So yes, that is one method, because despite her best intentions and this body's best intentions, the governor cannot use any government funds for something that is outside the government. This body would have to allow for that to occur.
Mr. Carlson, so the lapses in public health budget, if we could just go back to that, are there lapses in public health budget?
Right now, because we don't have to make the match, the potential with everything, again, it's not over till it's over. There are no lapses identified, but if everything stays the way it is through the month of September, when the fiscal year is completed and revenue collections have borne out what the projected and adopted levels are, then certainly there may be some extra money. However, we do have other needs in the government of Guam.
Do you know the amount that you're projecting then?
No.
All right. And how does public health have lapses if MIP is short?
Senator, I'd love to be able to engage you on this. I know you had a press release. I think there was a apparent miscommunication either in the message from the Director of Public Health, and I know you're reconvening on Friday, but I think the whole message was not as clear as could be, and I would love to be able to sit down with you and discuss some of these things, because there is the ability certainly to be able to take, as we have done before and do all the time, with monies that are allocated to public health and transfer it into MIP. Mr. Byrne will make sure any MIP claim and invoice for services that comes across his desk will be paid. Whether we need to do a budget modification to transfer from one object category to another, we will utilize the entirety of what it is that's been allocated to public health and not a specific allocation for MIP as it stands today. We do transfers all the time.
All right, well, that's exactly why I'm trying to get a handle on one agency as an example of what we can, as senators, apply to all the agencies. Because if we're not going to be told the amount of lapses, and those are going to be used to cover other shortfalls, at your discretion, I guess we just need to know that. We need to know, are we looking at real shortfalls or not? Because you're right, Mr. Carlson, the messages are not clear as to whether they are in need of money or you have $23 million in excess projected for the end of the year, like your CRER shows. So
Again,
thank you, Mr. Chair.
An abundance of caution. It is not at this point in time available. It is what it is that right now, if everything holds true and there are no adverse disruptions in our economy, then at the end of the fiscal year, September 30th, when we reconcile and we find out what it is we exactly recovered, then we'll know. Right now, a projection is only as good as the piece of paper it's written on.
Okay. Senator Paris?
This could be addressed to anybody. In regards to lean years, what do we normally see as far as reductions in revenues? Which categories?
Well, we're not having lean years these days. We're actually doing all right. But the 19 budget actually was a very optimistic budget. There were increases in property taxes. There was an increase in TAF collections, and there was, I think, a Healthy Future Fund adjustment as well. So the 19 budget actually saw that we have and are still being hampered by the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So it simply was not enough to rely on what it is that the government had in place in fiscal 18 as available resources to fund government operations. The legislature went ahead and augmented government revenues with the different increases to understand that the funding levels needed to be increased to make sure that basic government services were provided and the funding was there. So we're still adjusting, Senator, and It's probably going to take a little while because we normally will have a 3 or 5 year historical to go back on. We don't have the luxury of understanding the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act full impact. We thought withholding was going to take a more significant hit, but thank God withholding is actually one of our strongest sources of income these days. And we actually thought, back actually this time last year, that that number was going to drop significantly. So, it's a process in which there's a catch-up because corporation filings, basically we're seeing them this year. We're seeing how taxpayers are adjusting with their payments and things of that nature. We're cautious and we're trying to be conservative, but given what it is we've presented so far, we believe that it's a very prudent thing to take a look at the overall tracking and then to be able to walk back and say, well, the governor's request is still $9 million less, all things being equal. So it is our hope that we can meet with OFB and kind of get a very good consensus to revenue levels that the body will adopt in the future, and we can move forward with the discussion and adoption of the 2020 budget.
So with the Healthy Futures Fund, how quickly, can you explain the process of how the money, when it's deposited, where does it go? How is it processed? Maybe for Director Byrne.
I'm not sure I understand your question about how it's processed.
Yeah, I just, normally we should see a consistent amount of money going into the Healthy Futures Fund. And I believe the last time I checked, there was like $13 in there. So I'm just wondering how that money is processed generally. Yeah.
Oh, well, like anything else, any money coming in tends to go out because there's always demands on the Healthy Futures Fund. Part of it goes to the hospital, part of it goes to other agencies. So anything that comes in will go out. Maybe not during that month exactly, and if you're looking at a month-end balance, there might be a requirement to pay out in the following year, in the following month. But like, as you can see, for the special funds that are showing a tracking that is unfavorable, that really implies that what comes in is going out.
Is there a reason why there was a reduction in the Healthy Futures Fund and the other special funds, like the Territorial Educational Facilities, tourist attractions, custom and quarantine? What's the reasoning for the dip in revenues?
Well, as far as the Healthy Futures Fund, a large percentage of it comes from tobacco taxes, and there has seemed to be a reduction. I hope it's a result of a reduction in tobacco usage, but there has been a reduction in tobacco collections, and maybe the Director of Revenue and Taxation would like to talk about that. Which other funds? That is mainly derived from property taxes. As you saw, there was a publication, and again, perhaps the director would like to talk about that. There was a publication in the newspaper of a large amount of property taxes that are overdue, and I'm sure she would like to address how collections are being improved on that.
All right, thank you. Senator Kelly, Mars Titan, Senator.
Sidus Masi, I know it's a long last name. So I noticed we were going over some of the impacts by the census that's going to be carried out. So it's going to do some positive things for us throughout this year and certainly more so by next year. I know that there have also been a number of Department of Interior grants, and so if you could speak a little bit about whether those have been calculated in, or the positive impacts. I guess maybe I'm assuming too much to say positive, but it is money coming in. But if you could speak a little bit about the impacts of some of those.
Thank you, Senator. That's actually a very good question, simply because when we get a grant award, based upon a proposal, right, then we get a paper, yeah, okay, fine, but now I need your scope of work. And then they review the scope of work, and then you have, in some cases, like with respect to GRTA, they're providing money for a bus maintenance facility, but we have to provide the land. So until we get the land, we can't expend the money. So there's this catch-22 that occurs. Similarly, a good example is a recent announcement of $1.9 million for DOE supplemental, education-related supplemental funding. That's going to require, again, a scope of work to be submitted to DOI for approval, then the notification, the authorization to proceed, and then if there are any contracting that has to be done, the prerequisite RFPs. There is a lag between the time that you get a public notice of an award to then the actual submission and approval of a scope of work, issuance of the authorization to proceed, and then finally starting to get some work done. So there is a lag, but yes, you're absolutely correct. There are federal grants of all sorts that have been announced and awarded, but there's that prerequisite, due diligence to the process that still needs to occur.
Situus Masi for that. So I'm just thinking that, and the OFB chair can let me know if this is the appropriate forum, but perhaps if they were listed down in some sort of way to be acknowledged, that we would be keeping it in our minds, the public would be continuing to keep it in our minds, so that because there are those many processes to make sure that the money is indeed spent, it is indeed creating a positive impact, that maybe that could be one more way of having us do what we can to make sure that our agencies, or just in general, that we're following up on those processes and encouraging them to be done. Because I know for my oversight, I do have at least a couple of entities that have received monies, and I certainly want to be on top of making sure that they spend it.
Thank you, Senator. If I'm not mistaken, when DOI Assistant Secretary Dominich visited recently, he provided at least a speaker with a list of CIPs that were approved by DOI, and I would certainly welcome a reminder from the chair to the agencies of the importance to be able to go through the process and keep the eye on the ball and focus on the project. And I think as an oversight chair, you're certainly well within your purview to take an agency and say, okay, I know that you got this. Could you give me an update on it? I welcome that, Senator.
Situus Masi, yes, it's definitely important to be asking for those updates and asking for just making sure that there is indeed a plan being created to implement it, because timelines are tight, as you're saying, and if we only have 2 years to spend it, we really need to be on top of it. So, Situus Masi for your input on that.
Thank you. Senator Tello, Tariwe.
Situus Masi, Mr. Chair, and thank you everyone for being here today. I just have some questions. First, going to revenue tax. The public auditor released had a statement released recently regarding the Amnesty program. So I just wanted to know if you had an opportunity to read the OPA's comments and if that reflects the same projections that you have.
I'm sorry, I didn't read the OPA's comments regarding the Amnesty program, so I'm not.
You haven't seen it yet?
No.
Okay, so I'll get to my next question. Can you pass this down to Reverend Tax? And just take a look at that while I go through the other questions that I have. So if you have a chance to look at that and just compare the numbers, comparatives with that, and see if yours reflect the same thing that you reported to us. The other one is, just real quick too, while you're looking at that, the real property tax. The bill that was passed recently in the 35th Guam legislature to address the real property tax of property over $1 million. Has there been anybody come to Revenue Tax to refuse to pay the retro from the time that it was originally put in the 34th Guam legislature? Because I'm finding out, constituents are coming to me stating that it cannot be retroed. You know, the bill, you cannot go back from the time the bill that was introduced, and that there are potential suits that are going toward Revenue Tax because of this. Have you had anyone come to your office regarding this?
Well, I can say that we have had people come to the office and question, but what we have provided or advised them is that, you know, people are paying them. And so, you know, where we've had taxpayers, you know, say, well, you know, can I or should I? We've said, well, you know what, with regards to the way that we're interpreting the law, yes, we believe that they should be paid, and that's why we invoice those for the million or over, and people have been paying them. So in terms of someone coming and advising that no, they don't want to pay, you know, we've had questions about whether or not people have come and said, well, should I pay? And we've advised them, yes, absolutely, we've invoiced it, and then, you know, we again are carrying out what we believe that's what the law is.
So Daphne, have you heard the comments made by the Attorney General with respect to this situation?
I've not heard any recent comments, but I have spoken with the Attorney General with regards to this issue, though.
And he has said to you?
And his comments are very consistent with what has, I guess, come out in the paper with regards to his response to Senator Moylan's request. Mm-hmm. You know, basically that, you know, he wasn't able to provide response or to Senator Moylan.
And, real quickly, that amount of money that we're looking at, if there is a discrepancy on that amount going retro, do you know how much money that would be?
Senator, may I draw your attention to slide 18?
Sure.
Because one of the items on the agenda was a report on what that amount was, and I think the anticipation was 9 million, but when Revenue Tax actually did the assessment, it came down to 8.1.
Okay.
As Director Shimizu reported, we have collected $5.1 million of the $1 million or more. And I mentioned earlier that we are looking at providing some relief to the agencies who are the recipient of TEFF funding because of the shortfall. Mm-hmm. The reserves that BBMR put on their budgets, we are looking at giving them some relief in the near future. So the good news is that $5.1 million of the additional assessment has already been remitted.
But Lester, this is $5 million from the retro all the way up to currently, but I'm talking about the section of last year when the 34th Guam legislature passed the legislation. And
this is the same thing.
Yeah, so what
this is the same thing.
Okay, so you're saying that $5 million is between that retro?
Yes. Once the passage of Public Law 35-1,
right,
and Director Shimizu was able to bill, we have gotten $5.1 million. So
yeah, to date.
Yes,
but I'm talking about from the time of last year. You're calculating that amount from, I believe it's November when the Bill 35 passed, November to the time of February when we passed the legislation. So I'm talking about the amount of money from November to February.
Well, with regards to what was billed for the million.
What was collected?
What was collected? So what was collected is this $5 million, but it wasn't billed until after. Public Law
couldn't have been
35-1
billed.
actually became
Well,
law.
of course, it couldn't
this
be
year.
billed, but what I'm saying, okay, you know what, I'll take this offline for the sake of time, and I'll get a more clearer, question so that it's answered correctly, okay?
Thank
So I'll
you.
take this offline. Okay, the next question I have, going back to special funds, Lester, I noticed that you were very conservative in the executive budget that was provided to the legislature. And you came into certain areas that you showed us all about special funds tracking.
What slide page are you on,
Page
Senator?
8, Page 8.
Okay.
Special revenue fund tracking. And this does reflect the executive's budget. As I've gone through the special funds and did a comparable between FY19 and your projections or your request for FY20, there's other areas that have a great difference that you've put out. For instance, the Air Pollution Control Special Fund. There's a difference of 10,365. That's one of the smaller ones. But you're showing for FY20 that you believe it's going to be less than what was actually projected at 230,673. So there's quite a bit, over 15 areas of differences in special funds. The Guam Territorial Highway Fund, you have an increase there of 994,370 compared to FY19. So in FY19 it was 24,255,118, and your projection is 25,249,488, which is an increase of 994. The Guam Museum Fund, that one you projected, well, FY19 was 968,838, and in your request this year, or projections for the Guam Museum Fund, you're coming in at 480,213. Now, this is one of the bigger ones. That's a difference of 480,632. So let's just go with the Guam Museum Fund. Why have you projected it
Senator
substantially
Tello.
lower?
Excuse me, but if we're looking at slide 8,
Well, it doesn't limit.
it's not there. And if you wanted it, I can ask the BBMR provide on all the special funds and where it's tracking. But I think slide 8 doesn't show. But if you can, Lester, please answer that. if you can.
For the benefit of the listening public, the special fund revenue tracking report basically has these special funds on it. So when the chair asks for a report on special funds, these are the special funds contained in that report. Now, the good news, take it or leave it, is that, and I'm sure the OFB acting director will concur, we do have the ability of 5 years tracking on those special funds, and the museum fund isn't tracking. And the air pollution control, I mean, we have the ability to go back and look and see what current collections are, and have the same ability that we don't have with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So there was a lot of effort that in each of those individual revolving funds and other special funds that you are talking about that are outside the special fund report. And so each one of them, we had the ability to take historical data, current year collections, and I will tell you all right now, the museum fund is not bringing in that much money. So, you know, that's it in a nutshell.
Well, Lester, you did talk about special funds, that we have to be conscious of that we're not tracking like we are not tracking before. So I've taken the liberty to go over every single special fund that you have placed in your executive budget, and looked at these areas, and there are shortfalls, big time. Look at the Manpower Development Fund. You're estimating it was at 1.3 million, now you're putting it at 800,000. That's a shortfall of 552,000 comparable.
Yes, ma'am. There wasn't a consideration for the lack. Remember, we had H2 laborers. That's H2 labor. So we went like this last year. Okay. Now Mr. Massey just talked about how that is increasing. So the Manpower Development Fund, that one there specifically allows for these guys to expend up to what they collect. So that's a placeholder, but if he gets 1.5 million because of applications and things of that nature, then the language has always been you can expend up to what you collect. But you have to recognize that we almost went down to, what was our minimum before it went back up? We went down to zero.
Okay.
So, hello, come on, we got to go back up from zero. That's why we're comfortable with an $800,000, whatever the number is. Anyways, Senator, we can certainly take all these things offline. The whole purpose was to be able to take the major tax categories. I would love to sit down with you on the special revolving funds and all the other funds that, like, when you talked about air pollution control, that is specific to Guam EPA on permit fees. Okay, we can go back on what it is that you're saying. Well, what's the difference? Well, the difference is they're not collecting it. So how are we going to go there and say everything should get a 3% across the board adjustment? That's not a prudent way to be able to do things.
Okay, well, we're here for projections, right? And that's what we're all, here for this meeting, to put out projections. So you've projected these areas of special funds being lower and some being higher than others. So there's almost, if you look at your variances on this side and you look at what the whole entire special funds, you'll find that this number doesn't reflect too much of a difference. So I definitely want to talk to you offline about this if you have some time. Okay,
Appreciate
the
it.
other one is, so that's special funds, which if my other colleagues look into it, you'll find a great difference in about almost 20 special funds. GVB, the increases that you brought into play, oh no, it was answered. Greg Massey, you brought in some numbers, you kind of went kind of fast, so if I could get those numbers again. You have on the ground H2 workers currently. How many on the ground again was that?
$931 right now.
Okay, and how many applicants are still in process right now? Current applicants that have been submitted to Department of Labor for additional H2, how many do you have?
I don't have that number. It's not a lot. Right now I've got the number of approvals, which is 1,299. So those are actual approvals. What's in the pipe, I'd have to check. It's not significant right now.
It's not significant.
kinda
It's probably
slow.
about 30, 40, like that, or higher. These are
it'll-
applications that are.
It'll be more than that, but it changes every month. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I don't have like a 2,000 or 3,000 pending right now.
And right now, your denial has been zero so far? The denial has been zero as
For
long?
the NDA exemptions, yeah, we've gotten 100% approval.
Okay, as long as it's related to the military buildup, right?
That's a kind of misleading term though, because they've been pretty. So there's directly connected and associated with, and the associated has been construed kind of liberally, provided that employers are justifying it. So, like for instance, the Sabaki Hotel, that's a hotel project, but they've designated it as associated. We're finding there's an apartment unit right now, a 10-unit apartment that they've designated as associated. I think we could even go into affordable housing and those kind of things. So I guess the breadth of it is a little bit wider than just military related, that term that makes people think, oh, we're just getting approved for inside the base kind of stuff.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Greg, for that. For DOA, I have a question for you, Mr. Byrne. And the question is there an anticipated shortfall with respect to the subsidized for GMH for FY19? And how much is that?
No, we don't anticipate a shortfall in the payments to GMH this year.
For FY19, no shortfall at all?
No, and there wasn't a shortfall in 18 either.
Okay. With respect to prior year obligations, does the executive branch intend to seek legislative authorization through the budget bill for prior obligations?
think that's a matter for BBMR, and I'm sure it depends to a very great deal upon what the prior year obligation represents.
What was the question again?
Prior year obligation.
Sorry.
No worries. With respect to prior year obligations, does the executive branch intend to seek legislative authorization through the budget bill?
The detailed budget requests that were submitted to OFB, and I'm imagine disseminated to everybody because we made a lot of copies. One of the prerequisites is for each agency to apprise the legislature of their prior year obligations. So you have that information. To the extent that the flexibility and the authorization is provided to us, we can make some headway, but that only is available to us if you give the governor the ability to pay prior year obligations. If you give, let's say, Agency X a budget of $500,000 based upon the submission of their requirements, and in the legislation you don't give the governor the authority to pay prior year obligations, the only exception to that is if it's court ordered, and then we have the administration has the authority to make those payments. But yeah, so in the governor's budget request, thank you, Mr. Bill. Page 70, section 10, we're asking for a blanket authority to pay for prior year obligations as long as they do not negatively impact the current operational needs of the department or agency requesting for such prior year payment. So that's a blanket request. The only problem is every year we don't necessarily get that. Just saying. I mean, there's stuff that we put in, but we don't get it.
Okay. Okay, so last question, Mr. Chair, thank you for indulging me, but I'm going back to Rev and Tax. She had the opportunity to review the OPA's release.
Okay, so
Report.
is the, okay, there's the one statement which, or one sentence which says, the overall decrease in general funds revenue would have been higher if not for the $29 million tax amnesty collections in FY 2018. Is that the comment you're referring to?
And the numbers that you provided with us.
Oh, right. So, and actually, if you look at the tax amnesty slide, which is toward the end, excuse me. Right. So if you look at slide 17, we did actually receive, in general, on the general fund side, we did actually receive about $29 million in payments for the general fund piece. And then for the real property tax, or the TAF piece, we received about 1.3 million. So the 29 million does correspond with the 29 million which is there.
Okay. Thank you so much, Daphne.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Senator, if I could just point out that the
Yes, Ed.
29 million obviously helped to bolster up the general fund, and the deficit would have been considerably higher had the tax amnesty receipts not been received.
Thank you. Senator Pito Talai, Joe?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to go back on Mr. Carlson's statement regarding GRTA and the property that has been delayed to be given to GRTA. And let me just say that we had several attempts to introduce the bill, but on the first bill, we found out that when we introduced the land area, it was the wrong land area, and we had thought that the land trust had authority over that property. And then we sent in another request, we formulated another bill, and we found out that the land area, they corrected the land area, and we were told that it was under the land management. And then 2 days ago, we were informed that land management doesn't have authority over that property, and now it belongs to GITA. So I guess Bill 42 would be coming in, and it will be on the session floor in a couple of days, around maybe the 8th or the 9th of this month. And because I'm kind of just a little bit leery about, the federal funds, because we might lose that federal funds, because that federal funds was actually given to GRTA back in 2014. So either we address that and request for an extension, but I hope that Bill 42 would come out by next week. So then you can release that federal funds to GRTA. Thank you very much.
Thank you, my colleagues. Members of the Special Economic Service, do you have anything else to bring forward? None? Do I have a motion to adjourn? Thank you. Do I have a second? Second, this committee will conclude this meeting. It is now 10:53. Census Masi for your attendance and participation in today's meeting. And for those at home, thank you for watching. Have a nice day.